I believe you originally trained as a classical pianist.
I did. Well, I was raised in a family with, my father was in the radio business, as they say, and so I was raised on all the songs of Rodgers and Hart and Irving Berlin, and he was a very fine singer and pianist himself, and he wanted me to have a good training in classical music, so I started playing the piano at about 5 years old, 4.5, I guess, and my first big debut was with a symphony when I was 13, and it was after that that I started to learn folk music.
Right, and what first attracted you to that music form?
The first thing that attracted me was a song that was played on the radio called Barbara Allen. 'Twas in the merry month of May, that one.
Oh, of course.
And it was sung by Joe Stafford, and with a big lush orchestration by her husband, Paul Weston. And I was just dumbstruck. I just adored the song, and so I got convinced my parents to let me get a guitar and start singing folk music. My father actually had been singing Irish folk music, like the Kerry Dancers and things like that. Ever since I was born, I had been exposed to that too, but I didn't know that was folk music, really. I didn't really put the thing together. But then I started at 14 or so playing the guitar, and really became just enamored of folk music.
You ever stop and ponder how your life may have panned out had you stuck with the piano?
Well, I don't think I ever would have, because the problem with the piano was that I was also a singer, and there was no question that I was going to have to express myself as a singer. I sang in the choirs, and I sang in church, and I sang on the radio with my father from time to time. And I sang in a dance band. I sang all the standards in a dance band at about 15 before they found out I was too young to go into bars. I was singing in a dance band, singing all the repertoire, the Nelson Riddle, Frank Sinatra repertoire. So I knew all the songs because I was raised on them. And I think that the piano would have always been a limitation for me. Although I still practice, and whenever I write songs, I write on the piano. And I still am I have a very serious mental image about practicing and how important that is.
Yeah, do you still tinker away on the classics sometimes for your own enjoyment?
Yes, I run through the Chopin Ballade or this or that of the exercises, the Hannon scales and exercises, and the Czerny studies. I do all that because I'll tell you what, I think it stimulates my songwriting.
Yeah.
And I think it's very important to the kinds of songs that I've wound up writing in my life.
Tell us a little bit more about your father. You mentioned he was involved in singing and music, and he had a radio career as well.
Yes, that was his job. He was really quite a remarkable man. He was raised on a farm in Idaho. He was blind from the age of 4, and he went off to this school in Gooding, Idaho. And it became clear to everyone that he was very musical. And he had his own dance band and went to Seattle in 1935 and had the first sort of radio personality show there, where he sang and he did the commercials and he talked a bit of philosophy and read some poetry. And that was his format, and he did that in Seattle and Los Angeles and then in Denver, which is where I sort of consider my home. But he was very, very successful.
The great old days of radio.
The great golden days of radio, exactly. The old days.
Yeah, the good old days. This is about the early 60s folk boom. It must have been an exciting time to be involved, particularly in areas such as Greenwich Village. And for those of us who obviously weren't there, can you relate any specific memories of the feel?
It was very exciting. It was very accessible. The clubs around the country in those days, like the Exodus in Denver, Michael's Pub in Boulder, where I started, the Golden Vanity up in Boston, where I sang, the Gate of Horn in Chicago. The Gate of Horn was one of the first clubs that featured folk music as its entertainment, had people such as me, Will Holt, Sonny Terry, and Brownie McGee, Cynthia Gooding, who was one of the artists on Elektra. And in New York, of course, and San Francisco, there were clubs. The Purple Onion in San Francisco, and a club called Gertie's in New York, and the Bitter End a little bit later. And I started in Gertie's. I started working there probably in 61. The village was like a small town. There were people from various parts of the country who had come in to sing for the coffee crowd. People like Cisco Houston and Rambling Jack Elliott, and of course Bob Dylan a little bit later. And it was very exciting. It was very very accessible, I guess. I keep coming back to that word because you'd walk down the street and you'd turn into the Gaslight and sit down and listen to Phil Oakes and Tom Paxton and Eric Anderson singing their latest songs. And that's really how I collected my songs.
Yeah.
I listened to people sing what they were singing and said, oh, that's for me, I have to record that. Fortunately, I had a recording contract from very early on, from 61. And, of course, that is partly, I'm thinking a lot about that time now because I've just put out a collection called Forever, which is a combination of songs from my Elektra years, the 24 years I was with Elektra, and then the 36 years in all since I started recording for Elektra. And I have 3 new songs on that album. But there are a lot of things from the very beginning. The first album, Made of Constant Sorrow, is on the collection, and a number of things from those years. But it was very exciting. It was very easy. New York was not as daunting, and certainly the music business was not as scary or as mega bucks propelled as it is nowadays. You could get a foot in the door. You could get people to hear you. People came down from all parts of the country to wander in Greenwich Village and hear the songs of the singers then.
Must have been a real sense of community too amongst all the performers there.
I think that there was a sense of community. It's interesting. I knew a wonderful Australian writer who was writing about rock and roll, and she was in the village writing about the Fillmore and about the scene in the village, and there was a combination of, on the one hand, the folk music, and on the other hand, the rock and roll. And sometimes the two merged, and sometimes I would go to the Fillmore and do a show with somebody, and sometimes one of the kind of folk rockers would show up at the bitter end. So there was a lot of interchange. Peter, Paul, and Mary got together in the village. They were singers on their own here. And the Mamas and the Papas, same thing. In fact, I knew John Phillips before he formed the Mamas and Papas. I knew him in another band that started down in Washington, D.C. And I knew him when he was married to his other wife, his first wife, rather, before he met Michelle. And so everybody kind of gathered in New York and got to know each other. And in Los Angeles, too, there was a club out there called the Troubadour, and there was a lot of mixing and mingling amongst the singers in those days. Yeah, it was very hometown.
Yeah. And obviously you're in a great position of being able to witness firsthand some great young talents emerging. You've just mentioned some. Do any in particular stand out to you? You can remember the first time you saw them and you just knew that they had it?
Well, the people that I thought Dylan was incomprehensible. He was this kind of fuzzy-haired guy from up in Minnesota somewhere, who seemed to me to be somewhat inarticulate until I read his song "Blowing in the Wind" was published, and I read it, and I just flipped out. I thought it was an unbelievable song. It was one of the greatest songs I had ever heard, and of course I told him that, and then I began to hear his new songs. He was not writing songs at the beginning. He was singing Woody Guthrie and old blues. So when he recorded his first album, Al Grossman, who was a friend of mine, brought me the album to listen to and said, "What do you think about this?" He said, "The people at the record companies think he's not a very good singer." And I said, "Oh, quite the contrary. I think he's a great singer, and I think he'll be a major, major influence and star," which, of course, he was. I was immediately taken, and I started recording Dylan songs from the first. On Forever, the current Elektra collection, I've included Masters of War, which was one of the very first Dylan songs that I recorded. Over the years, I've recorded many, many of his songs.
In terms of choosing material, in those early days, you mentioned you were one of the lucky ones to have a contract there. Were you choosing the material yourself to record, or was Elektra having a say in it?
Well, I had a very good opportunity, as you said, to find songwriters. I met up with Leonard Cohen, and he sang me his first songs, and I said I want to sing both of them. And I met up with Joni Mitchell, and I said I want to sing both sides now. since neither of those artists had contracts yet, neither one was recording, it was a good opportunity to get some recognition for them and also to sing great songs. And there were other people like that who didn't have contracts or who were singing and writing their own material, and I was not doing that. I was not writing yet. I didn't start writing until 1966 or 7, I guess. I had what I would call a very good collaboration with the record company, because the man who was the president of Elektra was both my friend and also very, very involved, as I was, in hunting down songs and hunting down writers, for me particularly. So he and I spent a lot of time combing the village and looking for and listening to artists that were unknown. We found the Dylan songs together. We looked for, so it was really a matter of having somebody who would say to me, yeah, that's great, go for it, that's a great song to record.
You've had a great knack of finding those songs over the years. That must be something you take particular pride in yourself, to have that ability to suss out a great song like that.
Yes, my mother always tells me that I was taught by the master, because my father always chose very, very good songs. You know, he'd get a show from New York, he'd get a recording of a Broadway show and immediately pull out the very best songs and start singing them. And I think that's something that you do by, I don't know, as osmosis, I guess. You learn. But it served me very well, because I was able to, from the beginning, pick up on songs that I loved, In My Life and Suzanne and Both Sides Now and Someday Soon and Amazing Grace and Who Knows Where the Time Goes. And Sending the Clowns was a real oddball choice, because I was not very interested in Broadway in the early 70s. I was much more interested in the folky aspects of music. I was much more likely to be at a festival or a protest against the war than I would be to be found at a Broadway opening. And a friend of mine said, you've got to listen to this song, Sending the Clowns. And apparently people had sent it to my A&R man at Elektra, who had passed on it and said, oh, she'd never sing that. But the minute I heard Sending the Clowns, of course, I knew it was for me. So it's something physical when you hear a song that's right for you. Also, it's interesting when you hear a song that's wrong for you. There were a number of songs that were brought to me that I really did not feel good about singing. One of them was Killing Me Softly. One of them was I've Seen Rain and I've Seen Wind. I mean, there have been a number of songs that came to me the first time and I passed on, which became very big hits for other people, which just tells you that it's not always just the song. It's something about the combination, almost the chemistry between the song and the singer. Yeah. It has to be right. So a song that would be right for me might not be right for another singer.
Are there any particular qualities in a song that have to be there for you to make it one that you want to record?
Well, it has to kind of pull at your heartstrings, I think, and sometimes make you smile. I think it has to be something that I wake up. One of the things that I used to use as a test, I would get a whole bunch of songs together on a tape, and I'd listen to them. And obviously, I'd like some better than the other. But then I would wait. I'd play the tape, and then I would wait. And within the next 2 or 3 days, the melody of the song that was right for me would come back to me. That's sort of another way of working on another dimension, so that you know that the melody is going to stick and be something you can live with for a lifetime.
You mentioned Leonard Cohen earlier. You were the first to cover his songs. Do you remember how and when you first came across his work?
Well, I had a very good friend in New York who was best friends with Leonard. They were both Canadians. And she kept saying to me, I know this guy. This was in 1966. And she said, I know this guy in Canada. He's a writer and he's a published novelist. He'd written, I think, Beautiful Losers and a number of books of poetry by then. She said, he's just starting to write songs, and I'd like to bring him up to New York to meet you so you can listen to them. So he brought them up. He came to my apartment, he sat down, and he began to sing. And I fell in love with both songs, both with Suzanne and a song called Dress Rehearsal Rag, which I also recorded. And then I recorded almost a dozen of his songs over the next 6 years. So I remember very, very vividly how Leonard was very nervous at the beginning about singing. He didn't think he was a singer, but he trained himself over the years to be a great performer and a great singer, and I think he's a great, great artist. In my notes for Forever, actually I'm doing two albums with Elektra right now. One is my Christmas album, which is called Judy Collins' Christmas at the Biltmore, and one is called Forever, an anthology. An anthology. And in going through those songs, of course, I realized that there were a number of Leonard Cohen songs. Leonard also has another very important role in my life, and that is that he was the one who first encouraged me to write my own songs. And on my new album, I've included 3 new songs. One is an anthem called Walls, about my husband's design for the Korean War Memorial in Washington, and one is a song called The Fallow Way, about those wonderful times in the winter months when everything kind of slows down and you get a chance to catch your breath. And one of them is a song I wrote with Jesse Valenzuela from the Gin Blossoms, a wonderful young writer. So Leonard, I really credit for starting me out to write songs.
Right, and obviously you have covered a number of songs by a number of artists over the years, but I felt you've always managed to stamp your own identity on those songs. I gather that's important to you?
Oh, that would be the only reason to sing them, because from the beginning, a lot of the songs that I did that others wrote, nobody had recorded and no one had heard. And they became the standard because of the interpretation that I was able to give to them and the fact that they became very, very big hits on my records. I came to Send in the Clowns a long time after it was written, when a lot of people had recorded it, including Frank Sinatra. And at first, I knew I had to sing the song, and I heard his recording of it, and I just, quite frankly, didn't think that Sinatra's version had lifted the song to where it should be. And not that he doesn't do that with most songs. It's just that one I didn't think was tailor-made necessarily for him. So I felt free, in a sense, to go ahead and record it, which I did. And I felt from the beginning that the song had been, in a way, crafted for my voice and made in such a way that it would really suit me. And so when I recorded it, I was very, very excited. And of course, as you know, it became a major hit, not only once but twice, and that also is on the new collection on Elektra, the album called Forever. And I have a feeling that it will come out again and be played, just because I think sometimes the marriage of a certain singer to a certain song is what brings the song to life, and of course the singer is the vehicle.
Right.
And I was always trained that what my job is as a singer is to find a song and make it memorable to you, so that you can feel as if you'd never heard it before, and make it understandable to you in a different way. And that's really the way I've learned to do what I do. So I feel very fortunate that I've had great songwriters to work with.
Talking about the anthology, obviously you had a lot of input into what to include and what not to include on it. It must have been a lot of agonizing decisions to be made there.
Well, I've lived with that process. I started putting this together last year, and I listened to all the albums, and I made my notes. I just put the things on it that I love, the things that really get me, the things that I felt were turning points. Pirate Jenny on the In My Life album in 1966, which was anything but a folk song. It was kind of the signal that here was a different sort of direction I was going to take, and it would mean a lot of changes, and it might have meant risking losing all my fans, but I didn't care, because at that point I knew I had to make a new course and to chart a new course and do things that were exciting to me and different. So I included the Made of Constant Sorrow from my first album, and many things that I really love along the way. There were some interesting choices that I felt were important. I thought that Chelsea Morning, for instance, I really felt should be on the new collection, but I didn't ever like the original recording of that song. And so I re-recorded Chelsea Morning, and I'm really glad that I did, because I think it has a freshness of today, and it points out again that it's just simply a good song.
Sure. Looking back at the folk era and the protest era of the 60s, what would you put down as the greatest achievement of that movement?
I think that there were many, many achievements. I think that part of the benefit that we're seeing with so many people interested in ecology, interested in the planet, interested in living in a peaceful way, movements like the non-government organizations that work overseas, wonderful organizations like UNICEF. I'm a special representative to UNICEF myself, and I have traveled to Vietnam and to Bosnia in behalf of UNICEF and landmine awareness particularly. In retrospect, I think a lot of all of that work really began in the 60s when people were very interested in the planet and in people as people rather than being separate. They were interested in higher ideals, in ideals that would allow us to live peacefully on the planet. And I think that the seeds of Ted Turner's $1 billion gift to the United Nations really lies in the work and the activity and the activism and the vision and the foresight of people like his wife, like Jane Fonda, and like many people in the folk movement who wrote about and thought about and talked about and sang about ideals. Ideals are timeless. They are forever. We don't always reach our goals. We don't always reach our ideals, but if we don't have them, I think that it's not a life worth living.
Sure. Do you think music still has that power to draw attention to social and political causes as it did back then?
Oh, absolutely. Look at Elton John's tribute to Princess Diana, which is as valid as any poetry to celebrate either a great personage or a great cause. Music has the ability to move and stimulate the imagination and also move the heart.
Any current crop of songwriters that you particularly follow?
Well, there's some interesting things out there. I like that Joan Osborne song a lot. I think it's What If God Were One of Us. Actually, that's a Chertoff song. I think his name is Bob Chertoff wrote that. He's a writer that he works for Sony, I think. And I like a lot of the men writers. Of course, I'm wild about the new Dylan, by the way. Speaking of new singers on the block,
isn't it wonderful?
Oh, it's the best.
Yeah.
And of course, he turns out to be just as phenomenal a songwriter as he ever was. I've always liked Billy Joel's music. I love Sting's music. These are not kids, but I do like it very much. And I also like Sheryl Crow a lot. I think she's one of the best of the crop of new writers that I've heard. I think there are a lot of young people writing a lot of good things.
Absolutely. One thing I wanted to talk to you about is your foray into acting.
Oh yes, I've always felt that singing was acting, so it wasn't too much of a shift. Although there are differences, there certainly have been some interesting opportunities. I first started the acting in 1969 in the Central Park in New York, when I acted in a production of Peer Gynt, and then I decided in 1981 that I would try to read for some movies, which I did, but I didn't get any of them. But then later on, I was invited to be in a Schwarzenegger movie a couple of years ago, and I loved doing that. That was fun.
Actually showing on TV here this Sunday evening, so it's good timing that I'm speaking to you.
It's cute. It's a cute movie. I think you'll like it. Darling movie. And Schwarzenegger was a pleasure to work with, and so was Danny DeVito. Just a real pleasure. And then I got a part in a series called Christie in the States. I suppose that hasn't been in Australia, but maybe it will come. It's about a wonderful young woman who becomes a teacher in the South in the early 20th century, turn of the century. Tyne Daly's in it, and Kelly Martin is in it, and I play a sort of old folklorist in the community, and that was very nice to do. And then I just recently did a film which is coming out in March. It's a remake of a Rod Serling film, and it was a film that was created for the USA Sci-Fi Channel. So I have a lot of fun. I don't think I'd like to do a film that engaged me for a couple of months, but going out and doing, a couple of weeks is a real lark. I love it.
And how does performing for a camera compare for you with performing for a live audience?
Oh, well, it's very similar.
Yeah.
Though that part of it is very similar. At least I think so. I've always felt that there was a strong connection between the two. Well, part of it is that when you're singing in the way that I've sung, you are a storyteller. There's no doubt. And when you're acting, you're a storyteller. And what you're trying to do is to serve the text. And if you serve the text, you'll be fine. And whatever else is supposed to come out emotionally will come out. I mean, the actors that I love the most are actors that really serve the lyric in a sense. They serve the book. They serve the text. They allow the book to come through, the story to come through them. They become almost transparent in a way, so that they are serving the purpose of the story. And I've always done that with a song. I've strived to do that with a song, and it's a very satisfying feeling.
Speaking of storytelling, you have a novel, Nameless?
Yes, I wrote a novel. It took me about 8 years, and the most important thing about that book is that I finished it. It taught me a lot.
Yeah.
I think I have to reread it because I haven't read it since it was published in 1995. When I was finished with it, I wrote a whole album called Shameless also, which was exciting, to do an album based on the story, on the novel.
Which was tougher?
Pardon?
Which was harder to write, the novel or the songs?
Oh, much harder to write the novel.
Yeah.
Oh my, the songs just poured out. Once the novel was done, bingo, out came the songs. It was just a wonderful experience. I hope I don't always have to write a novel to make the songs arrive in such profusion. It was the first time I'd ever put out an album of my own songs, too, so that was another benchmark for me.
Oh, absolutely.
This is a rock and roll novel, really. It's about life in New York. The heroine is a New York photographer, and her life concentrates around the music business in New York. Not the folk music business, but the music business per se. And it's also a murder mystery, and so I get a chance to develop the character of my wonderful detective. And it was great. I had a great time doing it. It's a very sassy, kind of sexy novel, and it was just a real pleasure to do.
Something you'd like to try again?
I'm in the midst of finishing another book, but it's not a novel, it's a memoir. And then I will turn my attention back to writing fiction, but I think not a novel, I think maybe a screenplay.
Okay. What's the extent of your live performing these days, Judy?
Oh, I do about 50 to 75 concerts a year. I'm on a very full concert schedule in the winter. I always do a big Christmas concert tour. Finally have a television special. I hope you're going to see it in Australia. We have a cable channel here called A&E. Do you get that at all?
A&E, no, we don't. No.
Arts and Entertainment. Well, in any case, I have a Christmas special on A&E now in the States, but it'll be out on video next year, so you'll probably get it. And that Christmas special is called Judy Collins' Christmas at the Biltmore. I filmed it down at the Biltmore Estates in North Carolina last year. And it's really the accumulation of many years of doing Christmas concerts in New York. And so every year I go out now and I do about a 25-day concert tour around the country at Christmas time, which is wonderful. I'm about to go off to do that in about 10, 12 days. So I do a lot of concerts every year. I work with probably 20 symphonies a year, including symphony orchestras like the Hollywood Bowl we did last year. And so I get to work with orchestras.
Wow.
You know, it's like back when I was 13.
Yeah, done the full circle.
It's a full circle, and I have all these extraordinarily beautiful orchestrations. We do a very different show when we do a symphony day, because we do all the wonderful orchestrations for Send in the Clowns and Secret Gardens and My Father, and also we do some Cole Porter, and I even do a Paul Simon song, Bridge Over Troubled Waters, with orchestra. So I do a slightly different kind of repertoire when I do symphonies. And now on my Christmas tour, of course, I'll be doing Christmas songs. So I'm very excited about that. It's fun to be able to sing those new things.
Obviously, performing live and touring still has the same excitement for you. That hasn't altered at all over the years?
Well, I've been very, very fortunate in that I have always had a very solid base of concerts every year. And I've gone out every year for 36 years. You know, I think one year I missed in 1977 to 1978. I didn't go out as much because I had some health problems. But other than that year, since 1961, I have had a very full concert and performance life, and that's something that I aspired to, that I wanted, that I want, and that I'm very privileged to have that opportunity, because I work in great measure with a personal association with my audience. You know, they really come out to see me. They've always been so supportive, and they buy my records and they go to my concerts, and they follow me very closely. And now the audience is quite interesting, because the ages are range from little kids right up to people in their 80s, because I've done so much work with Sesame Street, and I've done so many things that are pop and contemporary, and I've done the Broadway songs, and so I've really had an opportunity to do a great deal of live music, which I appreciate.
And surely we'll have to get some Australian promoters to start knocking on your door too.
You know, I have not been to Australia since 1965, I believe.
Ooh.
And I loved working in Sydney and Melbourne. I would love to come back, put the word out. They've tried a number of times to get me over there, but the schedules were not right. But I'd love to be back in Australia singing, and I look forward to it.
Oh, it's long overdue, and you'll be certainly welcome, that's for sure.
Thank you so much.
Anything you haven't tackled in your career that you'd like to have a go at?
Well, as I said, the screenplay thing is appealing to me a lot. As soon as I finish this current memoir, I will dig into it. I'm very deeply interested in doing an awful lot more writing. I'll also, when the new year comes and I have this big Christmas tour behind me, I intend to get back very deeply into my songwriting, because my songwriting has changed a lot. These 3 songs on Forever, on the new Electra collection, are very interesting because they're very different. The Fallow Way is a very different song for me. My sister heard it and she said, "My God, that sounds like an Emily Dickinson song." So I don't know what kind of direction is coming out. I also have a lot of songs that I've written that are ready now to be polished for my next album. And so that will be a challenge to get that off and written and recorded next year. So I'm looking forward to a very big year in 1998, which I hope will include a trip to Australia.
Yeah, sounds like a big year, and we certainly hope you can squeeze us in there as well. I'll certainly be letting all the listeners know about Forever on Elektra Records. I'm not sure if it's seen local release here as yet, or you know about that?
I hope it's coming soon. It is on Elektra, and
Yep.
If it isn't there, it should be
Very
shortly.
shortly. Yeah, absolutely.
Ask your local record store to get a hold of it, and I'm sure they'll get both the Christmas album
And the Christmas one as well, yeah.
and also the collection, because it's a wonderful deja vu, and plus the present tense.
Absolutely, new songs as well, for sure.
Yes, new songs. You've probably had the Gin Blossoms tour in Australia, right?
Gin Blossoms have been through here, yeah.
And
Yeah.
Jesse, of course, I wrote this new song with. Jesse's a doll. We have a good time together. He came out to New York to sing our new song, which is called Nothing Lasts Forever. He came to sing it at my Hard Rock Cafe concert 2 weeks ago. So we had a ball. It was great to have Jesse Valenzuela playing on stage with me. So I hope we can pick up a concert or two where he comes and joins me on stage. It was a lot of fun.
Sounds like it as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, Judy, thank you very much for your time this morning. You've been a pleasure and a joy to speak to.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it too.
And
And I look forward to seeing you in Australia.
we'll be here waiting for you.
Wonderful.
Thanks
Bye
again, Judy.
now.
All the best.
Bye.
Bye-bye.